Hello and welcome to Hegel on the beach again, and we're actually at the beach, not at the graveyard today. So, unhappy consciousness, lecture 15. The unhappy consciousness is a dissatisfaction that turns away from the world into itself in order to find a type of existence that is pure and unchanging. It wants inner peace in the face of its own unfortunate attachment to the world. It tries to find the meaning of its life somewhere other than in its life on this earth. So skepticism, as we talked about last time, understands itself as the denial of worldly reality, and whatever we think exists must be doubted. So Sextus Empiricus, who we mention all the time, and even Marx, remember, ruthless criticism of all that exists. He's not skeptical, but nevertheless we've got echoes of that skepticism. So skeptics doubt external reality, and in the case of Pyrrhonists, they even doubt the truth of their own pronouncements. But indirectly, skeptics put themselves in a contradictory position. By admitting this internal skepticism about everything, they nevertheless ask us to believe that they believe in skepticism itself. So they don't deny everything, they accept their own skepticism, because they admit to their own essential right to speak on their own experience and the fact of their existence. The unhappy consciousness goes further and tries to resolve this contradiction, even though skepticism is a kind of form of this unhappy consciousness. So reality must exist and it must be something inwards, okay? So the unhappy consciousness is therefore, according to Hegel, one which knows that it is the dual consciousness of itself as self-liberating, unchangeable and self-identical, and as self-bewildering and self-perverting. Ooh, matron. And it is the awareness of this self-contradictory nature of itself. So it's a dual consciousness because it has an unessential but nevertheless real body in this world, accompanied by your arms, your legs, and other inescapable down and dirty body parts that I won't mention here, and some of which makes us do bad stuff. And at the same time, this dual consciousness possesses an essential transcendental consciousness, okay? And that's the bit that's going to go to heaven. So we're immersed in a world of senses and smells, where one part of ourself is located, and on the other hand, we're located and we find our true self somewhere beyond. Again, it's the Judy Garland thing I mentioned last week, somewhere over the rainbow. So the skeptic claims that worldly existence is unknowable because it is constantly changing, but doesn't see that it must look to its own inwardness to realize this doubt. On the other hand, the unhappy consciousness is able to harness this search for eternity inward to consciousness itself. So Jean Hippolyte, who was a brilliant French Hegel scholar, I'm doing my French accent. Hippolyte said this: henceforth it will no longer be the case that an I will confront another I in the midst of universal life, or a master oppose a slave from outside. With Stoicism and skepticism, the two consciousnesses have become the split self-consciousness within itself. Every self-consciousness, that means all of us, is double for itself. It is God and man at the heart of a single self-consciousness. So self-consciousness isn't just an historical moment, it's also something that we've got in our own heads. And Hippolyte, I think, I've forgotten the name of but if you Google it, you'll see it. Hippolyte did a really good description of this. Master-slave, which was an external conflict, has through Stoicism and skepticism been reflected back into the self. God and man, master and slave, become united, but still and forever in conflict, and become part of one consciousness. Okay, and we're also, I think he's talking here about medieval Catholicism and how it develops over time. So remember back in lecture 1 where I talked about the conflict between law and love in Hegel's early theological works, yes, and I keep on mentioning it. Also, remember the anti-Semitic rider that I put on Hegel's view of Judaism, right? Which I don't think it is anti-Semitic, but you can see how people can interpret it. But Hegel thought that, in fact, in some ways, Hegel represents the Jewish people as being the first people in history to actually grasp the meaning of inwardness. So I don't see it as being anti-Semitic. But anyway, Hegel thought that the Jewish people represented the first form of unhappy consciousness. He thought they were the unhappy people of history. So, okay, maybe anti-Semitic, but anyway, that's his view, because they represented the first attempt of consciousness to turn away from life. So the ancient Greeks, on the other hand, they have a totally unself-conscious whale of a time. They're the opposite. They're the happy people. They're the party animals of history. Or as Hippolyte put it, he says, they remain in the bosom of life and attain a harmonious unity of self and nature, transposing nature into thought and thought into nature. The Jewish people can only oppose itself constantly to nature and to life. So Hippolyte says it like that, but I think, Greeks are happy people is snappier. So Greek tradition is unself-consciously happy and happy. It's uncle and happy. And Judaic tradition is reflective and miserable or unhappy. So 2 examples. Look at the art of ancient Greece. In particular, the sculptures. They probably will never be surpassed in their perfection. And the classic Greek citizen was, in the words of the late Rick Roderick, in his video series, The Self Under Siege, and check it out because it's really brilliant. He says, the Greek is someone who is, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close to the truth, going on memory. He reads a thick book, he can chat philosophy with his friends in the city centre, he can do some great art and then punch out a big guy. Right. So anyway, he was an all-sided individual, fully integrated, except that he was always a man. Of course, there's no women present. But this sense of the Greek being the great and rounded individual is incredibly important in the modern world. So we've got criticisms of this very, the opposite of it, the opposite of Factory Man in Charlie Chaplin, the one-sidedness, no roundedness. So Charlie Chaplin attacked the mundanity of factory life in modern times, where man is just a machine. He doesn't read a book, doesn't do anything, he's just the machine. And also what Marx did, Marx wanted to try, he understood the nature of this one-sidedness of factory life. So what did he say? He said hunting in the morning, fishing in the afternoon, and literary criticism in the evening. One of the 3 in that order. All of which, though, unfortunately, were hobby activities and solitary activities too. So on that one, I would say Marx his spirit was right, but his practice was totally wrong, because these are not activities that the whole human race can do. But anyway, let's not go there. So on the other hand, we've got so that's the Greek consciousness. And on the other hand, we've got Judaism, right? So, I've got to make a confession now. So I'm not Jewish, right? And I checked on the 23andMe DNA site, and I'm like 90% Irish, 10% English, but I'm like basically English. No, because you can see if you've got any kind of Jewish in your history, so I haven't got any. So I've got to make a confession there, so I don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm an outsider. And apologies to anyone Jewish who's looking at this. But one of my favourite films is the musical Fiddler on the Roof. And it's based on the Ukrainian Jewish writer Sholem Aleichem. Very opposite now when you look at the invasion of Ukraine and Russian imperialism. But anyway, nevertheless, it's about pogroms in Eastern Europe. It's about atrocities in Eastern Europe. Does that ring any bells to modern sensitivities? Anyway, you'll know some of the music. It's dead famous, if I were a rich man. I've got the top on. Ziggy, 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 boom. All day long I'd ziggy, ziggy, boom. And also remember, matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Find me a find, catch me a catch. That's the film, okay? So Tevye, the milkman, he's the father, he's the hero. He's the head of the households. And I said, he reminds me quite a lot of myself, because everyone brings their problems to Tevye, right? And expects him to solve them when he can't in many cases. But anyway, Tevye is constantly involved in angry tirades against the God of the Old Testament. God, why have you done this for? Oh, God, please. So he's a very common figure, I think, in Western civilization. Why me? Why me? So he's about as unhappy a consciousness as it is possible to be, as though Hegel had him in mind when he was writing the book. But just like Abraham in the film, Abraham in the film Abraham, Just like Abraham in the Bible, in the film, what he does, he rejects his own child. He rejects us. He does exactly the same things that Abraham does. Anyway, so that's what Hegel's getting at in terms of, the unhappy consciousness. Only Hegel hadn't seen the musical. Maybe there's a Hegel, the musical. Phenomenology of Mind, the musical. I might do it in my next video series. Anyway, a bit more on Hippolyte, the commentary now. So, through this opposition, Judaism, discovers a subjectivity more profound than that of the Greeks, and prepares the way both for Christian subjectivity and for the reconciliation between self and life, on which Hegel's philosophy is a commentary. So Judaism is a step into humanity and inwardness. So Hegel's early studies of Abraham are well known. Abraham left the land of his fathers and shattered the links with life. He is now merely a stranger. This is Hippolyte, a stranger on the face of the earth. What a brilliant phrase. So the Jewish people carry this essential laceration within itself. Unable to love, I think maybe it's an exaggeration, but this is what he writes. For what is love? And this is rather nice. Love is the original identity which precedes any reflection. What a sentence that is. Let me just say it again. Love is the original identity which precedes any reflection. So you don't need the law to tell you to love. So when I said in the first video that Abraham valued law over life by being willing to kill his own son, I think that's what Hippolyte and Hegel are both about. So the God of the Old Testament is worshipped as sublime and therefore is beyond any finite reality. Judaism therefore is the religion of the sublime. And actually it results in the separation of God from man, even though it tries to attain unity. So belief in God, in the God of the Old Testament, means humankind is nothing. He is a beyond that is never reached. And Christianity is another form of the unhappy consciousness, but a greater form in a sense. Christ isn't like the transcendent God of the Old Testament, God the Father, where the infinite is and it can only be and always be separate from the finite world. With Christianity, we have the union of the universal God with a specific man called Jesus Christ. The master and the slave are the inessential to the free self-consciousness of the Stoics. So Epictetus, the slave, is just as free as the emperor, Marcus Aurelius. And when we reach this point, the contradiction between master and slave becomes suppressed and taken within oneself. That's the argument, okay? So the unhappy consciousness hovers between mastery and servitude, between life and the transcendental beyond. But it can only sit uncomfortably between the transcendental and the empirical, between heaven and earth. So remember the initial confrontation between the two self-consciousnesses, master-slave, how it got going. So one self-consciousness meets another. Suddenly, there is a point of view on the world that is different to mine. And I recognize that this point of view is just the same as mine because I exist only because I am recognized by the other, and I recognize the other. It will become apparent that self-consciousness is split. Okay, master and slave are God and man. The unhappy consciousness is the persistent change of one self-consciousness into the other. So no wonder it's unhappy. No wonder. One minute you're thinking about your transcendental soul, and the next minute your body lets you down. You're back on the ale, you're singing and dancing, and that becomes your real self. So then you wake up with a hangover and go, oh, never again. That wasn't me last night. Yeah, it was me, but the real me is this. That's the real me. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that last night. So that is this insoluble contradiction. So Judaism, the consciousness of the separation of man and God, leads to the incarnation. The incarnation is the birth of Jesus. Christ is born in Bethlehem, and that's the union of the two consciousnesses. We move from one form of unhappy consciousness, Judaism, to another more substantial and interesting form. As I said, it's interesting in that Christianity holds out the imminent possibility, the future possibility of secularism. Ultimately, Hippolyte says this: the embodiment of God, the figure of the historical Christ, which is the unity of the universal and specific, of a mutable consciousness, and the changeable consciousness, immutable and earthly and heavenly, is therewith produced for consciousness. There is an immediate unity of universality and specificity, of eternal truth and historical existence. Thenceforth, the unity sought by unhappy consciousness is realized for it, but it remains an immediate unity and thus one not free from contradiction. In its relation to Christ, Christian consciousness will discover itself to be an unhappy consciousness. Christ, as he appeared against the background of the Jewish world and manifested himself to his disciples, is the realized unity of God and man, of transcendental truth with specific subjectivity. For this reason, the attitude of Christian consciousness is quite different from that of Jewish consciousness. So the disciples sought in Christ the unity which the Jewish world and its prophets had sought, but that unity remained for them a truth alien to their own consciousness. Okay, so Hegel views the Crusades as an historical symbol of a metaphysical truth. Seeking to possess his object as a sensuous presence, the Christian must necessarily lose it. He always finds himself in the presence of the tomb of his own life, and he must experience the pain that is expressed in the Lutheran hymn, God himself is dead. But that tomb remains a sensuous reality. It therefore becomes the prize of a struggle and an effort that must necessarily end in defeat. Now, you remember, I think, was it last time I mentioned the Crusades? I give you the teaser on that. Hegel sees the Crusades not as an imperial adventure, but as a search for the tomb of Jesus. A kind of fanaticism that self-consciousness went through in order to put the Christian in contact with the living Jesus, only to find that the tomb is empty. So in the film Kingdom of Heaven, with the deeply cast Orlando Bloom as a crusader, you know, I mean, I'd make a better crusader than him. He's supposed to be a big, tough, sword-wielding crusader. But anyway, his character goes to Jerusalem as part of the Crusades, and he's kneeling down on the Mount of Olives, and he goes, I just can't find God here. And essentially, that's a really important moment in the film, because that's actually what the Crusaders found. They went there, the tomb is empty. So today, it's Saturday, and a couple of things have happened in kind of world history which are important about the grave. One is comic and one is deeply tragic. The first one that is comic is the funeral of Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, right? So she's funeral's on Saturday. As we speak, there is a 24-hour queue of people to get in just to see the tomb to see the coffin of Elizabeth, and also the pageantry and with all kinds of ritual. And it's actually the death of a god. It's like the death of the pharaoh. It's the death of a god because the entire nation's been mourning now for about 10 days and things have closed down. You can't look at anything else on the TV, just the funeral. And then people are filing past, I mean, half the nation. It's absolutely incredible what's going on. And it's comic. It's a comic thing. It's walking 12 hours. They interviewed David Beckham, the footballer. What do you think, David? We've all been in monikers. So it's a comic view. But nevertheless, the Crusades and visiting the grave, this emptiness of the grave, it still resonates a bit. It echoes in history. And in another sense, there's another really interesting and much more down-to-earth tragic, which is Izium. So yesterday or the day before, Ukrainians liberated Izium. So I've got my Ukrainian Vyshyvanka on. They liberated Izium. And what they did there, they found a mass grave. And science, forensic pathology, scientists, human rights lawyers are in there painstakingly looking at the grave to find the contents of the grave and to find the remains of human beings who've been murdered, tortured, horribly mutilated. And there was one really poignant thing I saw yesterday, which was a hand that had been dug up, and round its wrist was a Ukrainian wristband. And so in a sense, the wind's just come now as I've been mentioning this. This wristband symbolised what those people died for. They died because the nation symbolised freedom. In the case of Queen Elizabeth, it doesn't symbolise freedom. It does represent centuries of oppression. But in this case, it represents freedom against an oppressor, and it's told a story. And it will continue to tell a story. When Queen Elizabeth is long buried, this story will be retold. And it's an important story on the development. It's not, those people did not die. And I've said this a few times in this video series. They didn't die for nothing. Those symbols are absolutely, they're going to resonate we've only just started to tell the story now, but that's why forensic pathology, modern science, can link in with stories about who we are as human beings. And this kind of like, it is a form of religious experience, isn't it? When you see someone with that, I don't care who you are, when you see the wristband around the rest, you get a funny feeling inside of you. You get this religious experience. It's not to do with God, but you do find this sort of like transcendental experience, and it's putting it out there, it's a little bit religious, but I do feel, you can't help but feel something. You feel them talking to you, don't you? You feel the dead talking to you. Anyway, so I'll move on now. So, the medieval church. So that anticipated modern reason. Self-consciousness continued on its odyssey through medieval Christendom. I might have to do another video to explain a bit more about this, but anyway, the third stage of the happy consciousness concludes with the Christian of the Middle Ages who alienates self-certainty as self and who comes into the possession of reason. So that is kind of like sort of Protestantism and stuff like that, and the beginning of the scientific age. So the world becomes sanctified, because actually science originated, as we know, in religion. So the world becomes sanctified without the presence of the body of Christ through the Holy Spirit and the presence of the divine without Protestantism. For Hegel sees 4 moments in this: desire, labour, enjoyment, and thanksgiving. If I have time, I might do it in the next video. And we see this, at this point, the rise of the Christian ascetic as well. So you see people who absolutely hate their own bodies, monks who have to, flagellate themselves and stuff like that because they hate themselves, because they want to get closer to the transcendental God. So Hippolyte writes, Hegel describes the world view of the ascetic, the monk, who directs all his attention to his particular nature in order to combat it. So he's rejecting his earthly coil, but the more he rejects it, the more he can't stop thinking about it. And he shows the internal contradiction of such a struggle against oneself. The foe is always reborn in defeat. The foe is the body. And consciousness, instead of being freed of its foe, always remains in contact with it and forever views itself as tarnished. This perpetual consciousness of guilt, of evil within oneself is characteristic. It culminates not in the proud character of the Stoic, but in a character that is unhappy. As it is wretched. So when people like St. Francis of Assisi, the rich man who became a beggar, we can see this unhappy consciousness as it came into its own, and St. Augustine as well, a kind of less developed version of the unhappy consciousness. He's supposed to have said, I might have said it before, Lord, make me chaste, but just not today. But St. Francis, 7 or 8 centuries later, and 7 or 8 centuries of Catholic medieval theology later, really saw himself as he's guilty within himself, and he fought against himself because there was a constant battle of evil within you. And as we're here today in Llandudno, and over the other side of the hill, which is that way, there is the church of St. Tidno, and St. Tidno was a classic ascetic. So he came to this part of the world, this beautiful part of the world, which was very remote then, in order to hate his own body and then to get away from everything. But the more he tried to get away from humanity, the more he realised, I can't do it. He hated his own body, he hated himself, and the more he hated it, the more he reminded himself in order to get close to God. Okay, so on that note, it's getting a bit windy now. Hopefully you'll hear it. I'll see you later. Bye.